And I think that's worth repeating and reiterating, that true communication is the response you get. Imagine for a moment, if you have a partner who responds or reacts in a certain way from a certain style of communication, the only person who can actually change that is you. Great sex is a process. It takes planning, it takes preparation, it takes preparing for the things that you might want. Right? If you essentially are not ready, finally at the point where you want to have sex, and then you have to go and find a condom and you're running around the house for 10 different drawers because you have none, deal breaker, buzzkill.
All right. So this is another episode of Verbal Artwork with Mr. Rembrandt. I'm Mr. Rembrandt, and we have a great guest here today. We have Gabriela Rosa, who is a Harvard University award-winning scholar. She's a fertility specialist and a sexuality researcher. She's also an author and clinician, and she is branded as Talk Sex Online, and she has a podcast called Talk Sex. So Gabriela, if you could take it from there, introduce yourself.
Thank you. I think that, that is a mouthful.
Talk sex is definitely, talk sex with Gabriela is understanding the different dynamics in relationships, sexual relationships, and how humans interact. So thank you for having me.
Great. So first question, right, and it's different for everyone, but how important is intimacy or sex in a relationship?
I think that is such an important question, and you also hit the nail on the head. It is different for everyone, and there is a component to it that's also important, because what ends up happening in relationships is that people have different needs, different desires, different ways of expressing what it is that they need. And often, if a couple...
Your signal kind of froze a little bit.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, yeah. You froze a tiny bit. No, we're good. Yeah, you froze a little bit. Okay, you're good now. Perfect.
Okay, excellent. So let me just repeat that so that you can get that. Just remember what it is that I was saying.
Repeat the question for me, please.
How important is sex or intimacy in a relationship?
Okay.
Sex and intimacy are a cornerstone of a good relationship. Often as far as human needs and human desires are concerned, food and sex are right up there. And so what ends up happening is that being able to communicate our needs and our desires around sex is extremely important to ensure that we actually get what we want from our relationships. And I think that that's the key distinction that sometimes people miss, in the process of relating.
So how often should couples be intimate due that there are disparities in desire and sex drive?
Right. And so what happens is that disparity or that difference in sex drive can happen on both sides of the gender equation. And it's not just to do with women. But for the sake of the example, let's just talk as if it is, a woman's predicament in this particular moment in time. And so let's say that, she decides that she will have sex as an act of service, and she doesn't necessarily, she's not that engaged that she wants to have sex. The reality is that does she not actually want to have an orgasm? No. I mean, she would, trust me, women will be persuaded to having an orgasm, right? And we will be persuaded. If we haven't already decided that we are having sex, we will absolutely 100% be persuaded, gentlemen, to have that orgasm. It's a matter of actually giving it the time, the space, and the opportunity for it to unfold. Because ultimately, yes, it does take longer for women to orgasm than men. Yes, there is a bit more, kind of work and effort that goes into it. But the reality is that if she's not having an orgasm, it's not because she doesn't want to. And that conversation is important to clarify, right? And to understand, okay, what is it that I might need to do, or how might I need to approach you, or what needs to happen? And sometimes that is, a personal preference. sometimes I will like decide that, you know what, I've had enough. Either I'm too sore, or I'm too unwilling, or I don't want to, I just want to get sleep, and that's okay. But don't make that a habit, right? Don't allow that to become a habit in a relationship, because no woman wants to feel like they're just a toilet, right? That they're just there for a man to do his thing. And then, their needs and desires are just like, oh yeah, we'll deal with that another time. That never really arrives, right? So that's an important thing. Now, the other aspect to this that is also very key is that what happens is that there are different stages of sexual connection and there are different types of sex. Most people talk about sex as being sexual intercourse. Well, it's not really. A hand job is sex. A hand job is sex. Cunnilingus is sex. So the reality is that there are lots of different types of sex that you can grab. You might say that you don't necessarily want to have intercourse to have sex, right? And so that's also important, because you might decide that, in a moment, in a particular day, you might say, well, actually, I don't really feel like having intercourse, but I feel like cuddling. I feel like speeding, or I feel like a hand job, or I feel like, my man going down on me, or whatever it is, right? But I don't feel like necessarily having intercourse, or I don't really want to work that hard, or whatever it is. And so those conversations are definitely conversations that need to happen in that relationship, because you might decide that out of 7 days in the week, you only really want to have intercourse once, but you actually want to be intimate multiple times. You might decide that, you actually feel like masturbating and you just want your partner's help in having the orgasm, whatever it is, right? And none of those things are wrong or right. It's just what it feels, what a person feels like they want at that particular time. And that really is, I think, the best way to answer this question, because it will really depend on what it is that couple actually desires, is how often they should be having sex or shouldn't, and what kind of sex is completely up to them.
The conversation that we had before we started, you talked about how in a relationship that sex and communication are pivotal when it comes to the importance of sex and intimacy in a relationship. You had said that a relationship with high communication and high amounts of sex is ideal. It can work out very well. But a relationship with high amounts of communication and maybe low intimacy, low sex can still work. But generally, a relationship with high amounts of sex and no communication won't work out very well. And my question to you was, well, with that said, what kind of communication are we talking about, right? Because even in relationships, contentious or relationships of civility, it is, in my opinion, when people say communication is everything, it's not exactly as transparent as that, because it appears that couples are actually communicating all the time. Even when they're arguing, they're fussing, they're fighting, before a couple gets into a situation or a period in which they break the relationship off, they have engaged in tremendously high amounts of communication, whether it's arguing or whatever. So it's important to understand what kind of communication that we're generally talking about, right? Because all communication is not good communication. So with that said, you also, you mentioned a book when it comes to communication.
Oh, yes, communication in terms of, yeah, absolutely. But, communication is so interesting because, often when we just talk about, people should communicate well, right? We take for granted. I think that often really what happens in relationships is that we take communication for granted. We think that just because people react and respond to each other, that's communicating. And, one of the things that we've discussed previously was this whole idea that, when people are fighting and when they're in a relationship that is contentious or that they have issues, with each other, that they're still communicating. And that is absolutely true. But there is a very big distinction between good communication and poor communication. And relationships have this, incredible way of getting the best and the worst out of our communication. And we expect that our partner, often this is what ends up happening, especially when relationships break down and communication breaks down in a relationship. We expect that our partners are responsible for communicating in a way that makes us respond in certain ways. I have this poster in front of my desk. That is an A1 poster. It's massive. And it basically reads, true communication is the response you get. And I think that's worth repeating and reiterating, that true communication is the response you get. Imagine for a moment, if you have a partner who responds or reacts, whichever one, in a certain way from a certain style of communication, the only person who can actually change that is you, right? Because if you know that a person is likely to react, human beings can realize that and can take personal responsibility for our own communication and the realization of that, the sooner we have better relationships and we have better communication in relationships. That really is the number one thing that I think people need to really understand when it comes to communicating in relationships. There's a fantastic book that I highly recommend, and I recommend this book to anyone who either are married, will never get married, are in a relationship, or are not in a relationship. Because what this book is, it's the distillation, the condensation of all of this incredible research that has been done by Dr. Joel Gottman and Dr. Julie Gottman over a 40-year period on what makes relationships work. And one of the things that, we're very clear from the research is that communication can either bring you closer together or make you go further apart, right? The communication that's likely to bring you closer together is communication that responds to bids of connection. Anytime that a person says something, they're actually making a bid for connection. And whether we accept that bid and respond to that bid or not is really what's going to dictate whether the relationship and the communication of that relationship flourishes or dies. For example, right, let's say you're looking out the window, your partner is sitting down reading a magazine or a book or whatever, and you're sitting and you're looking out the window and you see this beautiful bird that's just posed there, right? And you might say out loud, "Oh, wow, what a beautiful bird." Now, your partner might be engrossed in the book, but that moment is a bid for connection. Because you could have just thought, "Oh, wow, what a beautiful bird." You didn't have to say it out loud. The fact that you said it out loud is because you wanted somebody to hear it. You wanted someone to respond to it. So even if your partner then, kind of takes their head out of the book for a moment, looks out and goes, "Wow, yeah, it is a beautiful bird." Can you feel the difference of that versus no response at all? Versus yeah, I don't think it's that great, right? So can you see in that moment where there really was no need for a response, or a response was super welcomed, a negative response can really damage that bid for connection. Because the only reason that I mentioned the beautiful bird out loud is because I wanted to connect with that person sitting next to me. And the two instances, in the variation of those three responses that I could receive, i.e. somebody looking up and going, "Wow, yeah, that is a beautiful bird." Even if they were to say nothing else, that is a beautiful response to a bid for connection. For them to completely ignore it is the same as for them to say, "Oh, I don't think it's that great." Because think about how it makes you feel. When someone either ignores you or has a negative response of that kind, even if they weren't meaning to, it feels like a personal attack. Even if the person who said it doesn't mean to take it personally. right? And it's just those little tiny things that sometimes we take for granted and we don't really acknowledge, but that can make a huge difference in how two people actually connect and communicate in a relationship. Now, if I basically say, what a beautiful bird, and my partner turns around and says, oh, wow, that is a beautiful bird, that could end there. But if they turn around and say, they stop, they look up, they look at you or me, right, and they go, that is a beautiful bird, just as beautiful as you, or just, whatever it is. Can you see how that, again, changes the context of that relationship and the context of that communication?
Absolutely.
So it's about figuring out, okay, what is the response that I would like to receive from my partner in this moment? And it might be that you just look up and say, hey, Andrew, it's a beautiful bird, and you go back to your walk, and that's perfectly fine, but at least that person feels validated. That person feels heard and seen. Even if you don't up the ante of, making it flirtatious or sexual or whatever else. But it's about, what humans truly want, and what communication humans truly want is to feel and to be seen and heard. That's what humans want. And if we can do that for another person, we're more likely to have them do it for us. But also being able to really truly witness someone, to see them and to hear them, is the essence for a great foundation in a relationship of any kind, sexual or otherwise.
Oh, great. Yeah, just to add in there, like I said before,
the book. I forgot to actually say the book, Rembrandt. It's actually The 7 Principles to Making Marriage Work by Dr. Joel Gottman. It's a wonderful read, and I would recommend it for anyone who is a person, basically. Even if you never want to be married, got divorced, whatever it is, the teachings of that book are fantastic for relationships in general, and any kind of relationship, actually. Friends relationships, to parent relationships, to sexual relationships, all types of relationships will be benefited by the teachings in that book.
Oh, that's great. And I'll put that book in the show notes. Yeah, I actually have it written down here. But yeah, communication is everything in the proper type of communication. Like I was saying, Jordan Peterson talked about how when they did research on dogs, for example, from an evolutionary standpoint, when you're trying to teach a dog to do new tricks, or when you're training the dog, you beat the dog when you're trying to train the dog for when it makes mistakes. It doesn't learn that well. But if you engage in a process with the dog to where you give positive reinforcement to when the dog does the things that you want it to do, then it shows that the dog will learn better to do what you want it to do. So the proper communication, right? Communicating in a way that your partner could understand and feel good about what you're saying, and you still get the same message across, right? It's so with that said, how do you balance out the difference in partners' sexual desire and drive, right? One partner might be higher than the other. How do you balance that out? Is that also through a process of communication, proper communication?
Yeah, look, and that's a really great question. And I think that it really depends. I've mentioned this before. And in fact, we've done a Talk Sex episode on exactly this topic, low and high libido. And people can look at that. I think it's episode 6. But what it is this. Yes, it's a process of communication. But what it also is understanding that a problem is only a problem if it's a problem for you. You see, 2 people might have low libido, and they might be perfectly happy with just cuddling every night and having sex once a month, right? Whereas 2 other people might actually think that is their description of hell, right? And they actually want to have sex every day. That's perfectly fine. And then you might have those people who are kind of mismatched, or because of a particular event or life circumstance, and this changes a lot for both men and, for example, around trying to get pregnant, after having a baby, during pregnancy. There are certain life events that might change a couple's libido. And so understanding what the issue is going to be the first way in which you can actually address it, right? Sometimes men feel that, seeing that their partner's pregnant and or becoming a mother, they feel that they can no longer sexualize them. Now, for your partner not to be able to sexualize you means that you're probably going to end up not having a great relationship sexually, right? It's important to be able to sexualize your partner. So to look at them and feel that they're sexy and that you want to do things with them and to them, right? If that doesn't happen, that the end of that sexual relationship may arrive, or there might be things that need to happen for that to happen once more, right? I mean, Esther Perel gives a great example in one of her books, Mating in Captivity, and, where the husband stopped sexualizing his wife. And so one day she basically said, that's it, you're paying me for this blowjob, right? And literally made him pay his wife for a blowjob. And all of a sudden he snapped out of, the kind of inability to sexualize his wife. And, it might seem like a simple one. It's funny. And it might seem like a bit weird, or, it might different people might have completely different reactions to this. But the reality is that the result and the outcome is what you're wanting to achieve, which is essentially the ability for both partners to really see that their sexual partner, as a sexual object. In order to have great sex with your partner, there is an aspect of that. Sure, you don't want to completely see them as a sex object every single time and at every single moment, right? Because at the end of the day, this is not Pornhub. But really, it's about being able to actually, in the moments that you desire, that you want to, that energy comes in and that flavor comes into the relationship. So how much and how little, it will depend on two people and the negotiations that go around those two people. And it might be, as we mentioned before, that sometimes one person wants to have more sex than the other, and they want to have different types of sex, because also sex is not, often when we think of sex, we think about sexual intercourse, right? And generally, again, not for all, but for the majority of people, penile vaginal intercourse, right? And there are many different types of sex. There are hand jobs, blow jobs, cunnilingus, anal sex. There's a whole lot of different types of sex and experiences that you can actually have with another person. And it doesn't always have to be in the same way. So the key aspect is to realize that you can also ramp up and scale intimacy and connection. One night you might just want to have, deep kissing and cuddle. And another night you might just feel like, I actually don't want to go through and have the whole sex thing. I just want you to help me masturbate to orgasm. Or another night it might be, actually, can you just go down on me? Another night might be, hey, take me. Whatever it is that looks like for that couple is essentially what makes the difference in that relationship, right? So those are the things and the distinctions that people need to be able to navigate in the process of negotiating. Because it's a negotiation, but you don't want to be having transactional sex either, which is basically, you do this and I'll have sex with you, or just having a very kind of, like, this is how we have sex and this is the only way we have sex. So let's just get in there, have it, negotiate, and get it. Okay, well, how can we actually, I want to be intimate, but my partner doesn't want to have intercourse. How is it that we can actually come to an agreement on the best of both worlds for both of us in that moment? And those are the conversations that they need to happen for couples in a relationship.
So great. How important is why is the foreplay so important for women when going into a sexual session, for example?
Yeah, that is a really great question. Foreplay is literally everything for a woman, right? It takes about 20 minutes of foreplay for a woman to actually, truly want to have intercourse. She might actually be ready and want to have intercourse before that, but in a long-term relationship, typically when things have, kind of, if you what's in your mother, you're like ready, right? It's especially if you actually are really attracted to that person. So from that perspective, it's really about, depends on the length of the relationship, depends on the quality of the relationship. If your partner, if you've had a fight, like as a woman, if you've had a fight with your partner that day, or they've done something that really has upset you, trust or play is right? And so being able to there also is a low the communication relationship of what's needed and what's required to put it at ease is going. But foreplay does that, sometimes, and this is actually a really good thing for people who have differences of discrepancy in libido, is that sometimes you might not be ready to have sex straight away, right? And you might not actually even really want to. So the key thing is this, in the discrepancy of libido situation, for example, right, a woman may not always be ready to have sex. Like there are two main styles, it's either you're ready to have sex or you get ready and you ramp up to wanting to have sex. Those are the kind of two predominant things. So what happens is that, and often I talk about this with my patients because you might not actually be ready and wanting of sexual connection or sexual activity by just standing there, right? Unless a woman is around her ovulation time, which then she will initiate sex. But that happens like literally about twice a month, okay? So that's how they need to understand that women don't often, and again, there are many variations on this theme and there are many differences across the board. But typically, women don't often initiate sex outside of that window of being really aroused, which happens around ovulation, which happens around mid-cycle. So about 2 weeks, about 10 days or so after a period. Some women also feel highly aroused just before a period, right? Or even during a period. So those are times that, when women feel highly aroused, they're more likely to initiate sex. But at any other time, what often happens is that we need to be enticed into the event, right? And that is where foreplay really comes in. Because if you are experiencing pleasant sensations, like if your partner is like, just playing with you, kissing, cuddling, doing things that are pleasant from a sensation perspective, then you're going to be getting closer to a point where a woman starts to become aroused. 20 minutes into that foreplay, into that kind of, focusing on enhancing and exacerbating sensation, you're then ready to have sex, right? So foreplay is a wonderful tool. It really is a wonderful way to connect. It's a wonderful way to reconnect. It's a wonderful way of actually getting ready, getting into the mood, getting into the event that is sex. I often talk about the fact that people think great sex just happens. Well, actually it doesn't. Great sex is a process. It takes planning. It takes preparation. It takes preparing for the things that you might want, the things that you might have, what kind of sex you actually want to have, right? If you essentially are not ready and prepared, as in your physical space, or like, worse, like if you're using a condom for contraception, for example, or condoms in general, right? There's nothing worse if you start actually the whole foreplay thing and you're ready, you're finally at the point where you want to have sex, and then you have to go find a condom and you're running around the house for 10 different drawers because you have none. Deal breaker, buzzkill, right there, right? Or if, you've had 20 minutes of foreplay, one friend completely disregard, don't know, are unaware that, yes, they might go down on a woman, but that is not enough lubrication. If you literally, sucked out all of the lubrication, the natural lubrication from the vagina as a result of oral sex, when you actually go and have intercourse, it's going to be a rougher experience. And some women don't like that, right? And that kind of experience often can turn a woman on. So having the right kinds of lubricants, having whatever it is that you need in that moment. And by the way, normalized lubricant, oh my God, just from having pubic hair, having a vagina touched, having it, basically rub against anything, it's going to remove the natural lubrication and the slipperiness that's required to have good sensations, right? To have pleasant and pleasurable sensations. So lubricant, the right kind of lubricant, is a must, in that kind of, extended foreplay scenario. So all of these pieces are going to actually be really important for ensuring that experience is a good experience. So that preparation, that process is actually vital. And, understanding those pieces is what can then help you navigate and prepare for a wonderful event, right, between two people. So that's one aspect. What was the original question? I actually got a little bit lost on the original question. So let's
foreplay.
go back to this. Foreplay, that's right, yeah. Okay, great. So can you see, so that preparation is also equally vital for ensuring that we actually have the ultimate outcome. Please, female orgasm should always be the ultimate outcome of any sexual experience at any type of sex. But, that's the way in which we can actually skew that conversation, that situation towards the pleasurable ultimate outcome that we want to have. And a message for women too, because, like for men and women, the key thing, women often, and men might not know this, but women often fake orgasms to end sex. It is one of the most commonly reported reasons as to why women fake orgasms. Because they're like, you know what, this thing is chafing, I don't have enough lubricant, this is not pleasurable, this is not actually feeling any good. Let's just pretend that I've had an orgasm so we can end this thing once and for all. Not great for the male ego, but that is what happens. So, so women need to, one, stop faking orgasms. It's not feeling good, girl, say so, right? Explain what it is that you need, show what it is that you need, do whatever it is that you need to do so that your partner understands, and do fake orgasms, right? But for men, also to realize that just because she's moaning, just because she's vocalizing, just because she's, doing whatever, it actually doesn't mean that she is having a great time. So you need to become, I think that as a man, what's important, women need to be, truthful, first of all. Men need to be aware and self-aware. And I think that is extremely important. It's really observing, because there are involuntary things that happen to a woman's body when she is truly aroused. Obviously, lubrication is one of them, right? But and sensation is definitely another one of them. But there are things that you will notice, like this flushing of the skin, right? Redness that happens underneath the skin, sweating that goes on. There's muscular contractions, legs, buttocks, abdomen. So essentially, those types of clues are important to look out for and see, okay, is this actually happening or is she faking it? Right? And to have that conversation, get brave enough to have that conversation. It's and it's during orgasm, of course. I mean, during orgasm, all you have to do is observe. I mean, if you are down there, which all men should be, by the way, right? It's just I know there are men out there who think that cuddliness is really not a necessary thing, or that they don't really like it. That would never be one of my partners. Just TMI, and it's women, really enjoy oral sex. So it's figuring out, okay, how can we actually get the best of both worlds happening? And again, it's not for everyone and whatever, whatever floats your boat. But the reality is, when a man is actually giving a woman cunnilingus, you can see, you can very clearly, because you're down there, you can very clearly see what happens and how the body responds, how her vagina responds, how her anus responds. Like during an orgasm, there's involuntary contractions that happen. So you don't have to guess, right? No matter what's happening, if a woman is having an orgasm and it's a real orgasm and you're actually watching it, trust me, you will not actually have to guess. You don't have to ask, did you come? If you have to ask, did you come? There's a very, very high chance that she did not. That is just how it is. And if she says that she did, you need to remain curious. Remain curious, because it's very likely that if you have to ask, that it didn't happen. So part of why foreplay is so important is because it enables you to actually start to investigate. I often talk about being a scientist of your own body, but also being a scientist of your partner's body. You start to be able to investigate what are the things that happen, what are the things you observe in a sexual interaction, when your partner is aroused, when they feel like they really want to have sex. And you can feel or you can see those variations, over time during different interactions, during, different times of the month. And it's about being curious and being observant and being aware and self-aware. I think that that's a really, those are important skills as a partner.
Great. Wow. So being aware and doing different things to understand your partner so that you can reach the maximum satisfaction during an intimate session. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. And satisfaction comes in many different ways. Like I said before, the key thing is that for some women, they might forego an orgasm simply because they're not having a good time. So really understanding that, coming from that place and going, okay, if that's the case, how can I first and foremost not focus on the orgasm, but focus on making sure that she's experiencing sensations that are pleasant, that are pleasurable, that she wants more of. Also understanding, I did an interview with Talk Sex last week, and there was an expert that came on, and it was a great conversation. She was talking about the fact that when it comes to women having orgasms, it's all about angles, right? It's all about sensation, and it's all about understanding, like embodying the pleasure that you feel. And if you're not actually having those experiences and building upon those experiences, understanding which side of your vagina is, more sensitive, which side of the clitoris, are they equally as sensitive? They're usually not. For different women, most women report that the left-hand side of the clitoris there's more sensation and is more likely to give an orgasm by being rubbed than the right side. But that changes for different women, right? And so understanding your own body and understanding what it is that you need and how to get your needs met within that context is a couple's exploration. It's an individual exploration. I say to all of my patients, self-pleasure is vital for you to be able to understand your own body, understand what it is that you need, understand how you make yourself orgasm. Because if you can make yourself orgasm on your own, you are much more likely to be able to orgasm with a partner. And if you cannot make yourself orgasm, it's going to be very difficult for a partner to help you or to make you orgasm. So that's why that self-pleasure and self-exploration is so vital. Because then you actually start to understand what parts of your body feel good, what sensations, actually take you over the edge. Sometimes what you need is feedback. So, inserting a toy in the vagina and making sure that you've got, muscular contraction that's happening so that you can see how you feel and how the experience feels as you go through the process through to orgasm is vital. Again, that's all about kind of mapping out your own erogenous zones and really your own kind of sensation, pleasurable zones. So if you understand that, you're much more likely to be able to actually teach your partner to do the same. And it's not the same as just masturbating to porn, right? Because what happens is you've got an external stimulation. The whole point of self-pleasure is actually understanding. It's like you are in your own body. You are making yourself feel good. You are actually touching yourself for the purpose of pleasure to get you to a place that you want to learn how to go without necessarily using, external stimulation. So that is an important practice. I recommend that women do that at least 3 times a week to be able to really understand their bodies and what their bodies need.
Really? So masturbation is important even to know yourself, to even know yourself to a point where you could offer yourself better in a intimate relationship with a partner. So how much is too much? Like you mentioned porn as an aspect that's may or may not be good for that process. Some people are proponents of porn, some people aren't. But how much is too much? Like how much is masturbating too much? that will desensitize you, give you an anhedonia for sex?
Fact is that I have nothing against porn per se, right? I mean, obviously we know that there are some issues in the porn industry. You know, there's obviously there are issues, and those issues need to be investigated in terms of what feels okay for you and what doesn't, right? And ethical porn, I think, is something that people need to look into for sure. But the reality is that there's nothing wrong with porn per se. What it is that if you can only, masturbate, if you can only orgasm with porn, you might have a problem, right? And so that might be something that you need to investigate and be curious about and figure out, okay, how else do I navigate this? In terms of masturbation itself, right? And I don't even love the word masturbation because really it's the meaning of masturbation is to make dirty. And there's nothing dirty about self-pleasure. There's nothing dirty about touching your body, pleasuring yourself, pleasuring your body. I think that that's actually a wonderful thing. So from the perspective of, that experience and that process, like I said previously, the same applies here. Nothing is a problem unless it's a problem for you, right? I feel completely validated and totally happy to have 5 orgasms plus, in fact, sessions a week without any problems whatsoever. And again, it depends on what it is that you need and where you're at. And orgasms are such a great stress reliever that like I said before, there is no woman who will ever say, I wish I didn't have that orgasm. It's a fantastic sleeping pill. Like, I would much rather have an orgasm than having a sleeping pill. Right? So ultimately, it just depends on what it is that you want and how it is that you're actually wanting to achieve that. So in terms of what desensitizes you, one thing that I personally don't love is masturbating with vibrators, because I think that anytime that you can only achieve an orgasm through one way, that's going to be, for me, something that I don't want to have a limitation on, right? So I actually prefer using my hands, using my fingers, because, and I might have a dildo, or I might have something else, but, ultimately, it's about kind of being able to explore and self-pleasure. That's really what it's about. It's not about just having an orgasm. It's about having a great, pleasurable experience. And if we can achieve that in whatever way that people will achieve that, that's perfectly fine. But that, is the goal at the end of the day. And, there are times, and there have been times where, very seldom times, but, there have been times where the quality of the orgasm is not the same, right? Or I'm extra tired or whatever it is. That's okay. Like, I'm not judging. Like I said before, there has not been a time that I've had an orgasm where I say, oh, I wish I didn't have that orgasm. No matter how much the quality may have varied, right? So from that perspective of what's normal and what's okay, and there are times that I'm just so busy at times that I don't actually engage in the activity as much as I probably would like to, right? So it depends. It depends on the person, depends on what's going on. If you're, having to stop your work 10 times a day to have an orgasm, that's, again, probably something that you need to consider as potentially something to find different experiences or other experiences that can fulfill that need, right? And that can be an aspect of addiction related to that. But, I think that for the most part, most people are pretty good at self-regulating on their normal, quote unquote. So it's whatever people want, really, is the answer. And I don't think, to be honest, lots of people talk about, and some people see the difference between, the correlation of watching porn and not wanting to be sexual with their partner. But I don't think that's to do with the activity itself. I think that there are other aspects to that. Sometimes, obviously, porn will almost kind of, it will train you to have an expectation of a certain experience, which doesn't always translate to real life, right? And so that is something that, again, could be problematic. So having a practice of, self-pleasure or masturbation, whatever it is you want to call it, that doesn't always involve porn or involves porn only seldom is a really good idea. Simply from the perspective of you being able to connect with your own pleasure without needing something external. In the same way that, sometimes you don't want to necessarily have intercourse, but you want to have a different type of sex, or you don't really want to have intercourse and you just want to, masturbate to orgasm. So it's really just whatever people feel that they want and need at that particular time.
Yeah, because I've definitely had a close, just a female friend of mine, who, just strictly friends, and she told me that, now she's in a relationship with another woman. She doesn't date men anymore, and we had a conversation, and I said, because she has kids, I said, don't you miss ever being with a man? And she told me that no, she said she has the rose to take care of that. There's a toy now, a rose, and apparently all the girls know about this, and it's an extremely good, pleasurable toy. And I told her, I said, well, wow, yeah, I guess a man can't compete with a rose the way you're talking about it. It's gonna be hard for you to compete that. So when she told me,
but this is the thing. Yeah.
yeah, so when she told me that, I was thinking like, well, wow, yeah, that's for that sake, it would be if a woman is using something like that all the time, her ability to, for example, dismiss relationships for long periods of time, and because of the fact that she's engaging in high forms of self-pleasure, and then maybe when it does come time to be with a man, for example, it's not going to be as pleasurable, or there's going to be issues there because that rose.
Absolutely. Rose. I don't think it's the rose itself is the problem. But you've touched on a few things that are really important to talk about. The first one is that, and it links to what I was saying before, is that if you are always accustomed to having a certain type of sex in a very prescripted way, and it always happens this way, and particularly when you're having high levels of stimulation, because any sex toy, any vibrating sex toy, is going to have a high level of stimulation, right? And no person can compete with that. But also what happens is that typically, and this is where foreplay comes back in to the discussion, typically what happens is that we haven't given it enough time and sensitization to the erogenous zones, or the person doesn't know their erogenous zones, to be able to say, okay, if we actually give this more time, and if we do things this way, or if we, etc., kind of like change things up a bit, then you can actually end up with having a great sexual, connection and relationship in that moment. Now, the other aspect to this is that sometimes people are disappointed in relationships, in sexual relationships, and they start to remember what I said before, that neurons that wired together. If they've been highly disappointed in a sexual relationship with a man, they're likely to actually see that as the origin of their problem in terms of, sexual dysfunction, sexual relationships that haven't worked out, whatever it is, as opposed to the reality that it could be to do with, hormones, or it could be to do with just a different time of the cycle than it is. We often correlate things that are, there's a saying in scientific research that correlation is not causation.
Yeah.
Just because two things are correlated doesn't mean that one is causing the other. So it doesn't mean that it's, necessarily the rose that's causing a woman not to want to have intercourse with the man or sex with the man. It's actually, those things are correlated, but one is not causing the other. There are underlying issues that might be causing that ultimate situation. And there are many reasons to why people have sex. And in fact, I read a paper last year that outlined 247 reasons why people have sex. So there are many reasons. There are broad categories of reasons. And one of the categories of reasons is that they want to boost their ego. Another category of reasons is that they want to gain an advantage socially. Another category of reasons is that they want to protect partnership. They want to protect the relationship, right? So there are many types of reasons like that. And so what happens in a situation where somebody decides that they don't want to have sex, or that they don't want to have sex with a particular gender, is that is usually trauma associated with those decisions. And trauma isn't always a massive event, right? It isn't always something happens and therefore I'm traumatized and therefore I don't want to have this activity. It might be a whole lot of micro transgressions over time. Patriarchy, right, creates microaggressions, and I'm not here to kind of down on patriarchy or whatever. At the end of the day, the way women are treated in society leads to microaggressions, and men too, and minorities, and you name it, leads to microaggressions that translate into forms of trauma. So I can guarantee that with your friend, it wasn't one event, one situation that made her feel like, I don't want to have sex, I don't want to have sex with men, and, the rose is going to fulfill my needs. Because ultimately, it fulfills the physical needs, but there are other reasons why we have sex that are related to how we want to feel, related to connection, related to feeling loved, being held. All of those different reasons for engaging in that activity often take priority. But what happens is if we are feeling traumatized at baseline, we're not going to want to dip into vulnerability because that is just too scary. Therefore, I'll go take my rose and do my thing and have had my orgasm. My dopamine hit is secured and assured, and I don't have any of the dramas that I would have to deal with otherwise. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. We, in some way, shape, or form, I talk about trauma a lot. We're kind of, our personality, our life evolves from a lot of different things we have encountered, including trauma.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on to another subject, given that that's one of your expertise and fertility being another one, what is the main issue that the problem couples have when it comes to having the problem of having a baby, the lack of fertility? What seems to usually be the top problem?
Look, it's such a great question. And I wish that there was a simple answer to a very complex problem, but there isn't, and the reality is that in my clinic and for the last 20 years, I have treated couples who have experienced infertility, implantation failure, and miscarriage, for more than 2 years, and typically have tried lots of different types of treatments and nothing has worked. So really, what I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis is the opposite of what happens in the general population. In the general population, most people get pregnant and have a baby without trying. That is the reality, is that most people have accidental pregnancies, or they kind of they weren't really protecting, therefore they got pregnant. Let's have a baby now. But when couples move on from there and start trying to conceive, in the general population, there's an average of 3 months time to pregnancy, which is literally have sex, get pregnant, have a baby, done. We're no longer having this conversation. When we're still having this conversation, then we need to understand why. Because often the minor factors that get in the way, like those microaggressions that cause trauma, it's a very similar thing when it comes to fertility, because there are multiple minor factors that get in the way that can negatively impact the way in which the body operates. You see, infertility and miscarriage is an end result. It's an outcome of many biochemical chain reactions that start all the way over here. So what happens is that when there are these minor factors that start getting in the way, that will lead to the outcome that we see. Now, what is a minor factor? Well, it could be irregular cycles. It could be lack of ovulation. It could be poor sperm parameters. It could be a whole variety of things, right? And if we pick just one of those, what we know, and this is again based on published data, what we know is that we have from an average of 3 months time to pregnancy. If you add a minor factor to the equation, all of a sudden we go from 3 months to 2 years average time to pregnancy. You add a second minor factor, so let's say PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, or poor sperm count. You add that second minor factor and we go from 2 to 7 years. And a third minor factor gives us an average of 40 years time to pregnancy. No one has 40 years to get pregnant, right? And so really the job that I have often with my patients is to take them away from an unexplained infertility diagnosis or an unexplained reason for implantation failure or miscarriage, and actually start to understand very specifically what are all the minor factors that are getting in the way, that are leading to the result or the outcome that we see that is different from what we want to see, right? So there isn't one aspect, there isn't one thing that people go, oh yeah, it's because I am eating the wrong types of foods, or it's because I'm doing this, kind of cycling, or because I'm drinking beer, or because it might be a combination of all of those things, right? It might be a combination of extra things like sexually transmitted infections. Many sexually transmitted infections are silent and will cause infertility in some way. So understanding what are some of these potential minor factors, some of these potential obstacles to optimal fertility is essential to be able to overcome it.
This will be the last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Now, you said there are many factors that lead to this issue. Well, what are some of the reasons why you and your company have done so well in having such a high success rate on getting individuals who are having difficulty getting fertility to be successful?
That's a really great question. That's, I believe, because we are very holistic in the way in which we approach reproductive difficulties. We're not just looking at the egg and sperm or the age of the female and saying that, oh, okay, there's nothing we can do. You're too old. Your eggs are no good. That's it. Go get another egg. We're actually really, really disentangling all of those factors, those minor factors, those obstacles to fertility that happen across those biochemical pathways, and really truly understanding what is the root cause of the problem that we're dealing with. I often talk about to my patients, when was the last time that you fixed a problem you didn't know you have? It's a great question, isn't it? Because what happens is most people will answer, how could you fix a problem you don't know you have? Well, in reproductive medicine, that is the expectation, that we're going to take the egg, we're going to take the sperm, we're going to put them together, and we're going to fix a problem that we don't know we have. Sure, we see the outcome of that problem, inability to conceive, inability to carry a pregnancy to term, but why? That is the question that we answer for our patients that doesn't get answered through standard therapy. And I believe that that's why we are more successful than the average standard therapy process out there.
No, so that's great. So this will wrap up and conclude another episode of Verbal Artwork with Mr. Rembrandt and Gabriela Rosa. It's been a great show. I'll definitely put many of the links to where people can follow you in the show links. Also, I'll definitely put in that book, 7 Principles That Make Marriage Work.
And put Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel as well.
Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel. Okay, definitely.
And you can put the fertilitybreakthrough.com website on there.
Definitely. I'll put all of that. And just really quick, tell people where to follow you, and then just closing remarks.
Great. So people can find me literally by Googling my name, Gabriela Rosa, Gabriela, and Rosa is the surname, or then go to our website, which is fertilitybreakthrough.com or rosainstitute.com. And I am pretty much on every social media platform, so you should find me there.
Right. Great. Sounds great. Well, it's been an excellent episode. Thanks for being a guest. Good luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome.